So to transition us into the content and by way of introduction, my name is Alyssa Johnson and I work at the Vermont Council on Rural Development. I'm going to start with the same prompt that I'm going to ask each of our panelists, which is how do you relate to flood recovery and resilience in Vermont? And if you ask me that question, I would say that my first full-time job in Vermont was in Waterbury. And it was a position that was created as part of Waterbury's long-term recovery from Tropical Storm Irene. My predecessor in that position was an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer who ultimately stayed and then worked for the town for additional years. As someone who came in much later on in Waterbury's recovery, I kind of heard the narrative about how the flooding had impacted the community and what changes that had brought. But it certainly wasn't something I personally expected to be involved in firsthand. That changed very rapidly on July 11th when I, now a member of the Select Board, was standing with multiple other members of the Select Board, a current and past municipal manager, at what Prohibition Pig, if anyone has seen, now calls the canoe launch on Elm Street because we had neighbors canoeing to their homes. It also was an exercise in community response, and so from that 10 a.m. meeting to our 12 p.m. emergency select board meeting, we created a Google form for volunteers that had 200 responses in that first 2 hours, and 1,200 by the time it became a wildly unwieldy data piece that we were using to coordinate both volunteers and those needing assistance in our community. So with that in mind, recognizing that one of my other privileges working at VCRD is hearing about experiences in other communities across the state and recognizing that what happens for me in Waterbury is one story, but we have different communities experiencing this in all different ways across the state, in different stages of recovery and resilience, and with vastly different experiences. So part of the goal of this panel is to bring perspectives from those variety of different geographic locations operating on both the local, regional, and statewide scale. So with that, I'm going to stop talking, turn it over to our panelists, let them introduce themselves with that same question of introducing themselves, their role, and how they've been involved in flood recovery and response. Start with Emily.
Thank you. I am Emily Lev. If you have my former last name in your phone, now's your time to fix it. And I was never a pleasure to have in class, Amanda. I am the wrong person to be sitting up here for Lamoille County. My role in our Lamoille flood response team is very specific. I am the public information officer. My job has been to make sure everything that all of the people actually doing the work had to inform other folks about was getting out there and was getting to every person in Lamoille County. The folks who actually have been doing the work are doing the work today. So we have a incident command, our unified commanders, we stepped it up very quickly because we had done the same thing during the pandemic. So we had a lot of the structure in place, and we had continued so much the collaboration and public information, all those things. It was very easy to step it back up. Clarissa French from United Way of Lamoille County, Greg Stefanski from Lamoille Health Partners, and Sarah Henshaw from Leaves of Change Vermont are the people who should be here today, but I will do my best to represent them. Thank you.
Thank you, and you are important. Information is important. That's a critical piece of all of this, so don't say you're not important, you're very important. My name is Bill Moore. I work for the town of Brandon. I actually started out as a volunteer, interestingly enough, a volunteer coach, became recreation director, economic development officer, and now recreation, economic development, and deputy town manager. So it can happen for you as a volunteer, certainly. Like, you can make your way up through, and people are willing, if you're able, they'd love to have your voice be a part of this. So the way Brandon's been affected by flooding, of course, obviously Irene was Irene, and during Irene, the downtown of Brandon was flooded. Route 7 was closed for a week. We rebuilt, and as a part of that, we did some flood resiliency initiatives to make our downtown a little stronger, and then I can talk a little more about that without taking up too much time at the beginning about what we've done. But I'm interested in sharing our story and how we were able to make it through this last round of flooding, and yeah, I'm going to pass it on to important guy, Doug Farnham.
Thank you. So I'm Doug Farnham. I'm the Chief Recovery Officer for the state. So I'm not a flood expert, definitely not an expert there. The last couple of years, been with the state over a decade, but the last couple of years, I was the person generally behind the scenes, usually like it that way, coordinating between the FEMA programs, coronavirus relief programs, and the state fiscal recovery programs. About 350 programs with about $2.5 billion. So trying to make sure all those programs played well together. And that's generally what I do, is I like to work with multiple agencies, I like to work with multiple government units, with the RPCs, with the LCT, and just try to get people what they need, to connect people, to support people, to share information with the delegation or with the Vermont legislature, try to make sure everyone's getting connected. So that's the role I want to play in the flood recovery as we start to shift out of response mode into recovery. The prolonged nature of this event means we're still, in response mode in some places, and hand over, start to move into recovery, fix what we need to fix in the short term for people's health and safety, but then really get together and plan what each community wants to do going forward and try to support that and try to make those plans realize.
My name is Chris Campany. I'm Executive Director of the Windham Regional Commission in Southeast Vermont. We include the 23 towns of Windham County, Reedsboro, Searsburg, and Windhall, and Bennington County, and Weston and Windsor County. I moved here in 2010, just in time for Irene. And my role now, it's interesting. The regional planning commissions, after Irene, were tasked with having a local liaison function through which we could help facilitate communications from the towns about their status, their needs, up to the State Emergency Operations Center, and that's during the response phase, and continue to help facilitate getting those requests back and forth, making sure, trying to troubleshoot, deconflict the communications. And then in the recovery phase, there are a number of things that we can do, spanning from transportation to land use to flood hazard bylaws, helping with flood hazard bylaws, lots of different things. The interesting thing was, before Irene, the state was actually thinking about getting rid of regional planning commissions. Then Irene happened and realized, wow, this is at the RPC level where emergency planning and transportation planning and natural resource planning and land use planning and energy planning and all this stuff comes together to provide support to the town. So it's actually the response to Irene and the recognition of needing this thing between local, state, and federal government that actually kind of gave us a second run. Now, during this event, I serve as also the chair of the Regional Planning Commission's Emergency Planning Committee, help coordinate between state agencies and what their needs are of the RPCs and figure out how we can help. We'll also note that one of the things, I grew up, you may tell from my accent, a little further south of Vermont, and specifically Mississippi, Louisiana, and Southwest Virginia. And a lot of places I really cared about got destroyed during Katrina and other storms. I've lived in places where it's not uncommon in the state to have a town literally obliterated off the map, and the state has to support the recovery. And one of the things that really concerned me that I saw after Irene was Vermont's limited capacity to respond to individual and family needs. Because we just don't have a lot of those types of disasters. And so got involved in state policy discussions around that, served on the Vermont Disaster Recovery Fund board, was chair for a time. And there is now a kind of a framework to address this, but this, talking to Ben Rose, who's the Public Assistance Recovery Officer. There's public assistance, which is town, municipal, state, road, public roads, bridges, infrastructure. And there's individual and family needs assessment assistance, which is what you'll hear IA, individual assistance. And according to Ben, this is a substantially larger individual assistance disaster than Irene was. And so we still have a lot of work to do on that front. I think we're still just trying to get our handle around the true scope of the problem and the recovery needs. So just wanted to bring that up. I'm sure we're going to talk, because this is about community leadership, you hear a lot about the public assistance side of things, not as much about the individual assistance side of things. And if we have time, I'll get into a little bit about how that works.
Well, on a non-technical level, I think we're going to prove that wrong right now and go back to Emily, if you're okay, to talk a little bit, both for those who are less familiar with the operating model you have in Lamoille, but how individual and family needs are such a big part of the work you all are doing there.
Yeah, I'll start with this. Lamoille County has been traumatized by this. And in the Lamoille region, I will include Hardwick in that. We have 4 towns that have been devastated, and the rest of the community was impacted in other ways. You know, Morrisville was on a no-use order for days. Immediately after, not even boil, they had no water, and there was no one coming to help. Tuesday morning, I got on a WCC meeting, and Reverend Becca from the United Community Church of Morrisville said, we don't have water to give people. And literally everyone on that meeting turned around and started texting people to bring jugs of water to the church. Because nobody was there helping this town. And so Stowe had water, Morrisville didn't. People in Stowe were literally filling jugs until the breweries started canning, because a select board member in Stowe was on that meeting and said, wait a minute, I know everyone who runs every brewery, I'm gonna have them can water to bring to Morrisville. And suddenly we had a water library that was ecumenical, and all of the different faith groups were working it and getting the information out there. But that's traumatizing to a community. I don't think the Reverend will mind me saying that her child created a phenomenal art piece out of the impact of those few days on this kiddo. And we're seeing that all over the place. We're seeing families devastated in our community. And we hear things like, well, people really should apply for the small business that says the SBA loans, because then they can get FEMA, and they're leaving money on the table, and they really don't understand they're leaving money on the table. And we're looking at them and we're saying they have the information. They're traumatized by what happened. The system is opaque. Yeah, they're not coming to the DRC. We now have a flashing sign in Johnson, like they have in Barrie, in Berlin on the way in, because we saw the flashing sign and we wanted our own flashing sign, and so a business gave us a flashing sign. But the response in Lamoille is very much all about relationships, right? We created a system out of the pandemic and incident command that we kept certain aspects of, especially the public information, which we did through the WCC, and we are grateful for that. But it's all about relationships. It's all about who's talked to this person and who's talked to this person and who's talked to this person. The trauma is real in all of our communities. I mean, the faith partners were like, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna get the Johnson Church up and running so that it can be a community center again, because the center was ripped out of this community. So when you talk about like the individuals and the families, it's so profound when someone says to you, my house is totaled. All I've got at this point is an offer of a loan. I can't use the land again because it will just flood again. We're living in a short-term rental out of the kindness of somebody's heart for the next few weeks. We finally got the cat back that my teenager was weeping about not having because it had to be separated from us. And I don't know what to do, but I have to be at work because I have to make money. And those are the stories over and over and over and over again. So I would say if anybody can help us get carpenters, electricians, plumbers, mental health counselors into our communities, that would be the thing that I would love to ask New York, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Rhode Island to send to us. Thanks.
Thanks, Emily. If you don't mind, Bill, I might skip you for now and go down to Chris and Doug to respond. I did just want to add briefly, for those keeping acronym score, WCC Working Communities Challenge, 8 regions throughout the state of Vermont. Jessica Savage on our staff would love to tell you more about it, as with any of the team members. DRC, Disaster Recovery Center, FEMA, and other federal friends, just for those not swimming in the soup. With that, Doug, so that's your challenge, no acronyms in your brief response to thinking of what you've just heard and thinking to a statewide level, what your position, what coordination looks like. What are the next steps? How are we stepping in to meet those needs?
So one way we're stepping in to meet those needs, which is not moving fast enough, and it's very frustrating, so I'll acknowledge that, is that the state is submitting a rather complicated grant application to FEMA for disaster case management. And disaster case management really helps support those families and can link them up with all of the different things like mental health services and the right programs. That's what we need, right? We need people to be helping to support those families and help them navigate, because the FEMA process, yes, you can get some benefit from it, but it is very complicated, very time consuming. And I was the deputy commissioner of the tax department and policy director and all these other things that are very technical in state government. And I would be intimidated going through some of the paperwork that they have people do. And that's, I don't want to say ridiculous, because they do their best, but it is a lot to go through. So what we're doing, we're submitting that application as soon as we can. We're talking with the FEMA leadership ahead of time, letting them know it's going to be coming, and please, we need this, we need this. And it's going to help support the community action agencies to go out and provide more support to people. So that's going to be the model that we're proposing to FEMA, is that we provide additional resources to community action agencies. Because that trust is also very important. I think, not without cause, not everyone trusts, FEMA, not everyone wants to engage with the federal government. Sometimes you need to talk that through, particularly when there's trauma involved. So that disaster case management is critical. We need to get that off the ground, and we need to deploy that so that we can provide more support, and it will also tell us how big the gaps are. We know there are gaps. We know we're not going to be able to make people whole, but we need to understand how and where there are different gaps, and then that will help us prioritize what recommendations we might make to the legislature. I think it's possible the General Assembly will even come back before the end of the year to potentially act on some things. And there has been some money already deployed through the Emergency Board, which is like the legislative money chairs and the governor. So I think that disaster case management is huge on the individual side. Do we want to hold off talking about the PA side and focus on the individual side for now?
Yeah, let's stay on an individual just for now. Chris, I know you brought it up, so if you want another minute or two just to share a little more about maybe what you've seen elsewhere or hope to implement.
Yeah, so just so folks know, so under the FEMA, under the national response model, it's there's not national policy for FEMA to come in and make households, and households include renters, right? Because oftentimes we hear homeowners. You have to remember renters and homeless people. FEMA, the national model really relies on statewide, local, nonprofit response to get people back into homes, get houses remediated, fixed so people can return to them. And that's the national model. And that was why I was always a little concerned about Vermont being ready for something. I'm not knocking Vermont at all. If you don't have experience with it, it's kind of hard, right? If you've been through something, it's kind of hard to grasp what the need might be. And I'm sure coming on the other side of this, we're going to be much better prepared, just like we were, we've really got like the public assistance side down, so it's going to get better. So that's why it's really important at the community scale, those networks that you're talking about are critical. The challenge we need to confront is not everybody's part of a network. Sometimes people purposely stay out of networks because for whatever reason. And it may relate to gender or race or ethnicity or income or any number of other things, legal issues, financial issues, mental trauma, and other things. And you're absolutely right about, like with Irene and with the Vermont Disaster Recovery Fund, we were still up, so it seemed many years after people asking for help because they just weren't in a place to ask for help until down the road. So the reason I'm bringing all this up is this is going to take time, and it's awesome that you guys are now already talking about hiring a disaster case manager. I'm not sure if that person's going to oversee the overall kind of like long-term recovery committee network or what that whole framework's going to look like or anything, but it's really great that the state's already on this because it took a while to stand that up after Irene. So already it's an incremental improvement. I'm not knocking that this is really important. So not knocking it at all. I'm glad we're already where we're at as opposed to kind of a bit further down the road. So I'm not saying be patient, but those of you who are leaders in your communities really need to make sure that outreach is happening to every corner and to every family and individual. Because too often what happens in the networks, I know when I was FEMA and Irene, we were in my pickup driving behind bulldozers as they were recreating roads to try to get FEMA out to identify individual assistance needs. And sometimes emergency management directors and other people will say, that, again, this is a knock, but again, they don't have the experience. How many people do you have who are unhoused or have insufficient housing or inappropriate housing? And they may think everybody's fine because they're on their grandparents' couch or they're staying with a friend or something. They're not thinking necessarily down the road about mold, not replacing heating systems, ducts filled with gunk, all that other stuff that happens. And it's not because they're ignorant of it or anything, it's because they haven't had this experience. And so don't beat up on yourselves, but try to learn what is all this individual assistance disaster recovery, what information you need to get from people. Hopefully there'll be some training offered and all for the volunteers to kind of like how do you deal with traumatized people to help them access resources. But this is going to take time, but thrilled that Doug and his other folks at the state are standing this stuff up and are already mindful of winter coming and a lot of lack of heat and other things that could be people going to be dealing with that they're probably not even thinking about it. They're just trying to get their stuff dry.
Thinking about that kind of long-term response and lessons learned, I guess, Bill, I do want to give you your time to share about, coming from that long-term perspective of many years in Brandon and what you can share with folks in the room in terms of your story and things that you want to make sure come out as folks, maybe are in more immediate needs right now, but kind of thinking of staying in it for the long run.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So, right away saying it will get better. That's keeping an eye on the long term. It will get better. We will be more prepared coming out of this. For us, post Irene, we were fortunate to have a person in the name of Ethan Swift, who's president of the state Vermont Water Infrastructure and Planning Program Manager, who had the foresight to induce the town to spend some money on infrastructure improvements to make us safer. And through those efforts, the town voted to fund $624,000 of a $2.5 million project to build an overflow structure through the middle of Brandon to save the road from being flooded. And 17 days after its completion, it experienced its first flooding event. I mean, and in fact, it was amazing, and it worked. And those kinds of successes have sort of built on some more town support. Success breeds success. We entered into working on the FEMA hazard mitigation buyouts, and through FEMA and through the Flood Resilient Community Fund, we've performed 11 buyouts of flooded properties that were prone to flooding, and these people have moved on and find other housing. Interestingly enough, while the state was experiencing all this flooding, we actually had somebody visit us from the Christian Science Monitor to talk about what Brandon did. And we sat on this beautiful sunny day on the 12th or 13th of July saying, well, Brandon fared really well and we accepted a little water. And then on the 14th and 15th, we received more rain that flooded a road that we're going to have to spend $500,000 to repair. That's in the spot where we bought out 6. We still have 10 houses left to buy out. And it happened again. So we put forth the effort, and yet still, there's more to be done. And there's still more to be done. I just met with Dr. Betts, who's around here, talking about climate change is real. This is our new reality. Getting your townspeople and your public officials on board to start taking advantage of all these state programs. A ton of state programs to help with the public side and municipal side, to help protect your infrastructure, to help with hazard mitigation buyouts for flood-prone properties. I mean, I can't beat that drum strong enough. Those programs work. Inducing, electing select boards that will encourage their town administrators, their town managers to access these programs in a way that is beneficial to you guys. It's just a pound of, an ounce of prevention, a pound of cure type stuff. Pass it along to Doug.
Yeah, let's say Doug. I know public assistance was on your list, but just to revisit in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, I echo everything Bill is saying about preparing your community. I think on the public assistance side, the hazard mitigation side, I completely agree that this is the new reality. This event, well, hopefully we don't get one of these every 10 years, but the way this happened, where there was saturation, the water tables just staying high, landslides, additional saturation, we're seeing those patterns happen around the world, right? And I think we can't reverse it all in a decade or even 2 decades, because we're talking about hundreds of years of development here that we're trying to adjust, and we're trying to prioritize what are the most impactful elements for your community, either protecting public infrastructure that's expensive or protecting the residential areas to make sure that they don't experience the same thing. I think there are a lot of major challenges here, but we also, before the flood, already had what many refer to as a housing crisis, right? We have no room in our housing market. We have stock that needs to be rehabilitated. We have portions of our grant list that aren't in primary residence, right? We have a lot of complexities on the housing side, and that all comes together to mean in the past we may have been able to buy someone out and they could have found another property. Now that's not necessarily the reality, right? So we have to also factor in housing neutral or housing positive solutions when we're evaluating how we're transforming our communities. So I think that's one of the areas, you know, some of those transformative projects are massive, right? And we're a small state, we don't necessarily have the funds to do all of those very ambitious projects, so we'll definitely be trying to leverage federal support as much as we possibly can to transform those communities in the right way. I think it all comes down to the direction each community wants to go. I'm going to support mitigation in every community I talk with, but that means something else in every single place. A lot of the homes that suffered landslides, unfortunately, there's not going to be much that you can do to mitigate that. Once that geology has been compromised, it's probably going to be no longer suitable for human habitation, right? So there will be some areas where we lose ground and we have to figure out how to make it up somewhere else. So I think that this will be a lot of conversation over the next 10 years at least. And I look back on a lot of the improvements that were done in Irene. I believe, I was looking at the rain charts, and I believe, especially if you count the multiple storms, we got more water in this event than in Irene, right? Irene was like one day of just pouring. And we got more water, and our public infrastructure that we improved in Irene held up extremely well. The recent projects done held up extremely well. And they reduced harm to individuals, they reduced harm to public infrastructure. And we just need to keep chipping away at it. We need to make sure that every community has the same opportunity to do that, not just the communities with a lot of resources, which is where the RPCs come in with that regional support. And hopefully where I can come in as well, trying to make sure that smaller towns don't get their voice lost. The other thing I would say, just a funny anecdote, I was in the military before, I got out of the military, came back to Vermont, and the first day of work that I was supposed to be at the tax department was on Irene. And I was, you know, just coming out of the military, I called my boss, I was like, there's water in the steep, you want me to come in? Like, I'll walk through the water, I've done it before. But she's like, no, do not do that, stay home. So, I think it's funny that my professional career right now has been bracketed by Irene, and now this flood event significantly changed my direction. But it's all a way of saying, I think, in a way, we need to turn, you know, lemons into lemonade here. We can make our communities safer, we can make our communities stronger, and we can set ourselves up for growth if we approach this properly. There are a lot of programs out there, and I think we just need to make sure we don't lose sight of the people that were traumatized. You know, we have that continued support for the individuals. Businesses also need certain types of support. It's a different kind of support because we know there are not as many federal programs that engage with businesses. And then that community planning needs to all roll into one to make sure the next time this happens, fewer people are impacted and fewer and less infrastructure is damaged.
Please do. I was just going to say, our subtitle here is getting it done. So while I agree with absolutely everything you've said, I would also ask Chris, as someone who works with local leaders, community leaders, folks in the audience, I will say I'm a select board member. It's a busy job day to day, and we have the luxury of a town manager. So how are we thinking about supporting communities and next steps, plus whatever you were going to add?
So I see Alyssa Shadler back here who has the State's Urban Community Forestry Program. The last time I was in this room, I was speaking at the Arbor Day conference, speaking about the importance of towns. There's a term we use called stovepiping, like currently towns oftentimes will stovepipe the land use planning and the hazard mitigation planning and the conservation planning. And really all those things need to come together for us to have more resilient communities, because the towns are already doing a lot of the fundamental work. So to the extent the planning commission and the folks who are really focused on emergency planning, including your road crews, they are such critical first responders that we take for granted, and then your conservation commissions. All of that planning work that your town is often already doing can be harnessed to kind of really address these adaptation and resilience needs. Everything going from like, okay, how do we make our compact settlements, our villages and downtowns more flood resilient, but also importantly, and hopefully the state will kind of be revising its designation programs, how do we grow those compact settlements in a way out of harm's way with the supporting infrastructure, water and wastewater, so you get density as opposed to sprawl. And then we have these more resilient communities, and while you're at it, through your conservation efforts, look at how do we improve access to floodplains for water? How do we really protect those headwaters to mitigate stormwater flows, you know, as water comes rushing down those slopes? How do we identify critical areas in the river corridors that are prone to slumps? And the state really has this great flood-ready communities program now that a lot of the FEMA funding is limited to homes in the floodplains that can demonstrate repetitive damage. The state now has a program that can help you do buyouts and do other mitigation that are outside of floodplains, like in fluvial erosion hazard areas. We have a lot of areas in our region, like Reedsboro and Saxon River, where there may be houses 100 feet above the river, but we know that's just they're sitting on a big pile of sand and gravel, and when the water gets up, those roads will all wash away. So, and then you've got the local hazard mitigation plans that pretty much identify all the natural and man-made hazards, and like where the most typically blown out culverts are, and places that are at risk for landslides and other things like that. So oftentimes, you've already got all this information. It's just getting the people and the plans all working together. So, and that's something the Regional Planning Commission can kind of help you with and strategize through. And just one thing about repetitiveness of events. So, Irene happened, in our case, a lot of southern Vermont was hit harder during Irene. And that was, like Doug was saying, that was a flashy event. Then our second worst, and in some cases worse than this year's flooding, was our 2021 flooding. We got like 6 inches of rain in a good part of the region in just like an hour and a half, kind of like what happened in Madison County. And in that case, we actually had more individual assistance damage because it was streams, and not even streams, just, not even intermittent streams, just drainage around houses, blowing through homes. And then we had our most disastrous winter in southeast Vermont, probably on record. There were a number of places that were out of power for like 2 weeks because we got like 3 feet of cement sitting on trees and power lines. And so already the soils were saturated. Luckily, we went briefly droughty before this thing happened. But this is gonna keep happening. And one thing that I would encourage you is it's really important to own the reality of the atmosphere that we're living with now. You're not doing people favors by saying, property rights trump everything. Your ability to deal with your property, trying to even if it's moral suasion. There's an author I love named Wendell Berry. He has this term, do unto those downstream as you'd have those upstream do unto you. I feel like we should have a plaque in every home. So maybe you don't put all your crap right by the stream bank, to ultimately wind up jamming up somebody else's driveway or bridge or town bridge, creating an impoundment that then breaks and floods other people's property. Yeah, you've got the right to do that, but maybe you shouldn't. And I don't mean to kind of offer tough love here, but there's a lot of hard decisions we need to make in order to keep ourselves alive and keep ourselves in our home. That what you're doing on your property, what your neighbor's doing on theirs, has absolute impact on your ability to continue to live in Vermont. Because as we're talking about here, right now we're under a circumstance where if you get displaced, you may have to leave the state. And I'm not saying this stuff lightly. This is the world that we're living in now. And we need to own it and feel responsibility for one another in our own actions.
On that, Emily, do you want to follow up in terms of, thinking about communities and community response? Are there certain things that you feel like are really imminent needs right now and into the future in terms of how folks can support that?
I do. Okay, so 2 things I want to bring up that haven't been brought up. First of all, as I'm a parent of teenagers, so it's going to come from a little bit of a personal place here. These teenagers, the ones who were 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, when we shut the world down in 2020, just got the world shut down on them again. So the schools are going to need your love and support. And if you are a parent of a teenager, I see you, I feel you. I know that your kids have reacted. I'm hearing from all of my friends that, and my own kids, like, this was not just a one-off for them. They were like, oh, this is what we're doing now. So the schools are going to need support as we go forward in a significant way in mental health for our youth who were so vulnerable the first time and then we did it again. The world does not seem safe to them. And that is a really significant problem. The second thing is a good thing. Okay, so we have a confluence of a couple of things. Here are the things we have. In Lamoille County, we already were vacillating between 0 and 1% vacancy for affordable housing, and affordable in capital A and lowercase a. 0 to 1%. We were already in a situation where we could not build our way out. Again, cannot build our way out. And if you've met me ever, you know that housing goes hand in hand with transportation, and transportation goes hand in hand with housing. We cannot talk about one without the other. So, we have this situation where we didn't have enough housing to begin with. Then Lamoille County lost more housing units per capita than any place else in the state. 69 per 10,000. It is devastating. Entire areas where we've lost housing, where we already didn't have enough housing. Okay, so that is bad. I will tell you two really, really important beacons of hope. One is, and I'm a little biased because I'm stepping down as the president of the Rural Community Transportation Board, but our executive director stepped up, went to VTrans and said, how can we step up transportation in this situation? And they've stepped up busing from Johnson, but they've also stepped up no ride denied. And what that's going to do is give us data as we build forward on how we can expand microtransit around the state to expand the places where we can have that housing. When you talk about trying to move housing density to safer places, you know what we need to go with that is, of course, transportation. So every time we talk about housing, we talk about transportation. Every time we talk about transportation, we talk about housing. The other thing that is going on in this moment is a softening of the short-term rental market. If you own a short-term rental, you know you're not renting it as much as you used to. Those are folks who are members of our community, many of them. You have an ADU, you have an accessory dwelling unit, you have a unit that you rent out. You want to be part of your community, and a lot of those folks have been stepping up and saying, you know what, my short-term rental isn't being used, I can give it short-term to be rented out for flood victims. If we want to pour resources into something, we can be offering incentives to our short-term rental owners to make up the difference in what it costs to rent it out as a short-term rental versus a long-term rental, because we need to create units yesterday, and those units already exist, and these are members of our community who can't afford to be long-term renters right now, long-term rental units right now, because you make so much less. But if we want to pour some money into something, we can pour money tomorrow into incentives to turn short-term rentals into long-term rentals, so that those people who've been displaced by the flooding, or those people who were intense and displaced by the flooding, those people who didn't have housing before, can utilize those units. We don't have to build those units. They're there. We just need to make sure that people who own them can afford to rent them out long-term. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Well, that's sad. I'm going to say open book in terms of important things for community members to remember coming into this next couple of 6 months, something you feel like isn't being talked about enough.
So, I want to sort of harken back to what you were talking about with information. Information is power, right? And so being active as far as being a municipality and communicating with your residents, as community organizations, making sure you're keeping the lines of communication open, meeting people where they are. For us in Brandon, when we, for instance, by statute, when we post a select board meeting, it only has to be in 2 places, and but we go above and beyond by making sure we put it out on front porch forum. We have that Facebook, we have it, reaching people where they are. That former representative talked about 40 residents in 40 nights. Making sure when you're talking about going door to door that you're marking it off on a map. We have tons of volunteers. I mean, that was the one thing that we learned out of this storm, is that everybody wants to help. Everybody wants to be a part of something big and be useful. Use those people, create those networks to make it easier for them to be useful. Those 40 days and 40 nights in Lamoille County, if you get those how many volunteers showed up in Waterbury? I mean, I think about, so many people that are out there willing to help, creating networks that they can use to be useful, in the dark times and in the bright times, those blue sky days. Emergency management definitely works. We went above and beyond with our emergency management to the point now where we're talking about reimbursements for FEMA. FEMA's 75% for public assistance, and then there's ERAF, which I always forget. I looked it up as we were sitting here because I'm always like, ERAF, what's it say? Emergency Relief and Assistance Fund. You can get a percentage of your ERAF. We're up to the highest percentage. We can get a 17.5% match. So of those public infrastructure projects that we're going to be doing, we're only paying for 7.5% of that. A lot of that work can be done ahead of time, can be done now to do those hazard mitigation things. And again, work on your emergency management plan. That's an important piece, as we all know. Work on your emergency management plan, do some trainings. Volunteers are a huge part of that. Empower your volunteers to make sure that they're able to either provide information, gather information for you, or just be there to move debris to the side of the road.
Doug, I'd love to know, you spoke about the ongoing grant application, but in terms of other priorities for you, both, immediate and maybe next 6 months or year, what do you see the future looking like in terms of what those most pressing items are?
So in the short term, Vermont already has, the state of Vermont, already has significantly more resources dedicated to municipal support for the FEMA application process than after Irene. We hired 3 or 4 full-time people after Irene that have a decade of experience now and are amazing experts. And we also, because we got lucky is a hard term to use here, but we had a disaster support contractor through the pandemic that we were able to immediately, within days of the flooding, operate a statement of work for them to provide additional technical support. So we want to provide full advice, guidance, technical support. We will, if your town wants to engage and wants questions answered, we will not stop answering your questions. We brought on the bandwidth to be able to answer more questions. Now, there is a line between technical advice and guidance and getting stuff done, right? And I know in that getting stuff done category, that's where some of the smaller municipalities are going to have stumbling blocks. So I am going to be thinking about that. Some of you may be familiar with the Municipal Technical Assistance Program. That was one thing I pushed for at the Agency of Administration related to helping communities with technical, direct, hands-on technical assistance resources in the town on the state fiscal recovery programs and the bipartisan infrastructure law programs that were coming down the pike. So I think in the short term, making sure the municipalities have the resources to make the choices they want, that's what I'm going to be focusing on. And I don't think we're all the way there yet on the hands-on stuff. Technical assistance, I think we have a good base of support for that. I think this next town meeting is going to be critical because people are focused, they're into it right now, but energy fades, people forget. If we don't move in this moment, if we don't move in this year, if we don't have those important conversations next spring, it will fade and it will become harder for people to make those financial investments. So I think this spring is critical for a lot of Vermont communities to make those kind of directional decisions of what's best for your community. And then I would say the philanthropic community has already been amazing in this disaster, and I think they continue to put a lot of effort and energy. And the nice thing about them, and I'm starting to, I don't even remember when I was appointed at this point, but recently, starting to coordinate with them, not getting in their way. I'm not going to get in between them and any community. I'm just going to try to find out what they're wanting to do, how they're wanting to help, and maybe connect the dots between people, maybe line people up, right? And see if I can help them. Because the philanthropic community, as much as I love state government, and I will continue to work for the state for as long as they'll have me, philanthropic community is much more nimble. Right? They're going to be able to respond to local conditions. They're going to be able to move faster. They're going to be able to have a lot more flexibility. I have very specific duties and authority that I cannot overstep, right? And I may be able to want to help. I maybe want to help with something, but I can't. Where a philanthropic organization, if that same need is referred to them, they might be able to make the decision in-house to help. And So connecting the dots is going to be very important. So if a community needs help, needs connections, I would encourage you to, it's adm.2023floods@vermont.gov. We can take almost any type of flood-related inquiry there, and then it will source it out and get it to the right people. We will respond.
Keep it on and it goes off. Doug preemptively answered my question, which is where do I email? Chris, close thoughts on next 6 months or something that's not being talked about?
I've got lessons learned from Irene. It'll take 2 minutes. You want me to share those?
You and I.
Okay, but I think these were, this is not necessarily formal official guidance, but what we learned. So individual and families need their own disaster response plan. Everyone should assume that they may become isolated without assistance for at least 48 to 72 hours. 2, everyone should assume that if an event can displace them from their house and or office with little or no notice. Family members may not be together when an event occurs. Keep essential items such as medicine within reach and ready to go where you do go. Develop a family communication and meet up. 3, towns need to be prepared to subsist on their own for at least 72 hours. It is possible that towns can be cut off from external aid, including external joining towns or even parts of their own town. Use your own local emergency management plan that you mentioned to think through the possible risks your town faces, how you respond to those risks, and who is best suited to execute necessary tasks. 4, if the town says it will provide a service such as a shelter, make sure the town does in fact have the capacity to provide that service. Before an event, know what's expected, invest in what needs to be invested in, make the service viable, seek training and support, and drill. 5, do not appoint someone to execute a task who cannot perform it. We found during Irene, a lot of people were tasked as emergency management directors who were never even told they'd been tasked with that. Persons assigned a task in the local emergency management plan must knowingly accept that assignment, be ready and willing and able to execute. 6, know the roles, distribute responsibility. You may appreciate this. No incident command structure. Do not assign multiple tasks to a few individuals such as the fire chief and emergency management coordinator. People in command should use volunteers to keep from being overlooked. And one of the things we discovered quickly after Irene was the absence of like a incident command structure. Now lots of towns, everybody's become informed and educated. It's one of the reasons, frankly, why I think the response to this has been much less frenetic and chaotic than previously. 7, towns need to be prepared to assist one another. Your neighbor may be your closest resource. 8, town operations may need to move. Just so the events can displace family, it can displace town operations. 9, the time to locate and save critical records is not during the event. This is true for families and towns. Identify and protect critical documents from fire, water, and wind before the event. Have computer records backed up and off-site. 10, state resources support state operations first. State resources may or may not be available to a town in the event of a disaster. Towns should assume they will need to be self-sufficient in their response and recovery. 11, neither FEMA nor any other government agency or program will make a town, household, or business whole in the event of a disaster. Disaster relief programs are intended to be supplemental. 12, insurance policies should be reviewed on an annual basis. Policies change and town homeowner needs change. Make sure your policies reflect your risks and needs. 13, if your town participates in the National Flood Insurance Program, everyone, including the town itself, is eligible to buy flood insurance. And note, a lot of the flooding that happens outside of the floodplain. And if you're outside of the mapped floodplain, flood insurance is relatively cheap. So if you think you're at all at risk, your regular home insurance policy, your regular town insurance policy, your regular business policy will not cover you. 14, plan for financial resiliency. Towns should maintain a relationship with lenders that allows them to borrow what they need to respond to a disaster. Towns should also create a rainy day fund in case it rains, and it will. 15, inform the public what to expect ahead of time. Take advantage of preparedness weeks to educate your citizens about how they should prepare for and respond during an emergency and what they can expect from the town. Include material in your town report for town meetings. It can be difficult to communicate critical information when the power is up. Inform your residents ahead of time. And 16, last, be prepared to manage information and keep your communications capacity during an emergency. People want to know what's going on. If left in the dark, will assume nothing is, or worse, rumor will fill the vacuum. Establish a public information plan ahead of time, both to both provide the public with information they need to know and control rumors, train staff and volunteers for this work. And that's it.
And I'll add to that something we learned from COVID. Look for the unusual suspects. I was a volunteer faith leader when I got called in to be public information around COVID. Our faith leaders stepped up in all sorts of ways to do things. These were not people who'd been involved in the work before. Look for the unusual suspects. We found another volunteer who's now a unified commander in this, who just stepped in because she had disaster experience in other places, but nobody knew she existed. Look for the unusual suspects, they're there.
They're there, and some of you are in the audience. Just want to take a moment to acknowledge how many of you here have been involved in this. And with that, we have about 15 minutes and want to open it up to more broad questions from folks in the audience. I will run like a chicken with my head cut off and direct that to our panelists and then give them a last minute for closing thoughts. So here we go.
Could you please repeat the email address that you announced very, very quickly?
It's adm.floods2023 at Vermont, the full word Vermont.gov.
What constituencies are you working on? Is it just the select board person? Is it anyone else?
So any municipality definitely, if an individual sends us an email, we will make sure that gets to the individual assistance team. It's mostly focused on municipalities, but we're definitely going to take a no wrong door approach with that email.
Thank you. I think this is largely a question for Emily and Bill. I really appreciate, Emily, what you said about relational organizing immediately within communities, immediately after this, because from sort of where I'm sitting, there have been a number of just profound failures at the state level. The 2-on-1 system, the volunteer feels to me like Vermont's greatest strength and frankly weakness sometimes has been that town-by-town community organizing. So I'd love to hear from you both what you are doing and have done within your communities to build that kind of resilience and that kind of relational organizing for, as we all know, when this keeps happening.
So first of all, I'm going to call out Amanda, who has been phenomenal in her community in that work. And thank you for the work you've done in your community. It was sudden. It was, what's the line? No one expects the Spanish Inquisition. Like, it was sudden. We knew rain was coming. We didn't know this was coming. And we did have a person in our community who has significant experience. And she said to us from the very beginning, we need a needs assessment immediately. So we quickly, through our United Way, created some portals for how people could just communicate with folks. And there was an email address set up immediately, volunteer at Lamoille.org. And we had a volunteer coordinator immediately step in, and it was this woman, Sarah, who is the Leaves of Change Vermont. And she stepped up and started putting in 18 hours a day, immediately setting up a volunteer system, working with the select boards, working with the hardest hit areas. We couldn't even get to those places, so she was communicating with the leaders in those communities on how to get volunteers there. And offers to volunteer were pouring in, and we just, she started funneling them in, creating the best she could, a system. And initially, a lot of the volunteer work was helping get stuff out of people's houses, and how do you, and then it got really grody. It was like, how do you get insulation out from under a house, which our volunteers were not created for. But part of it is in that the panel this morning covered this. Know the person for the job, right? So I didn't step in any capacity other than what I'm good at, which was public information. I stepped in, I did that. That was my job. Sarah stepped in and did volunteer coordination. That was her job. When Sarah had to go on vacation, Representative Carpenter and I stepped in to do volunteer coordination while she was gone, but we were only doing what we were good at. When somebody stepped forward and said, listen, I actually have a whole lot of construction experience, and at the same time I heard from somebody whose father hadn't gotten the help he needed, I put this guy on this particular unit, and he went back all week with volunteers. He said, this man's house is my job. and he just kept going back. So it's knowing the right person for the job. When your faith partners step up, when one church is really good at serving another church, you put them in charge of that, and you put them in charge of faith partner coordination. When one particular faith group in your community is really good at knocking on doors and you need people to knock on doors, you have them knock on the doors. When another faith community has a lot of farmers and steps up and they can't work their farms because they're flooded, you put them in charge of moving things out of houses. So it's knowing the right person for the job, it's stepping up really quickly, and it's that Vermont attitude of like, we're gonna take care of each other right now until somebody else steps forward to take care of us. And you're right, there were a lot of failures. And it from the statewide, and I was so grateful to see my community saying, okay, who knows how to do this?
You said it all. I mean, we are beholden to our communities. I mean, we live in these communities because we love the people that we're there with, and so we're going to take care of our own. For us, it was, I guess, codifying a lot of those volunteer systems within our municipality. And again, doing the outreach and being responsive. We get emails every day from folks about everything, and responding to them in a timely manner is something I pride myself on, that our town manager, that our new town manager with the chair of our select board, prides herself on responding to everybody. Everybody is important. You have the same, making sure that your municipality values that and make that a part, it reflects your community's values. Everyone is a part of that community. Your government needs to reflect that. Again, by statute, your government's supposed to do this, but what else can we do? We can put it on front porch form. We can make sure that all our meetings are on Zoom and they're on our website so you can see them and be accessible. Welcoming volunteers into the fold. They're out there they're trying to take my job, they're trying to do something I'm supposed to be doing. What is their motivation? Versus welcome them in to be a part of your community, be a part of your municipality. And always be growing. The change piece is super important. We're always changing. If you're not changing, you're done. Just at this last bit for us, with our road closures, we instituted a brand new opt-in texting service. It costs $60 every time we send it out, but it's well worth it. And we were marked about 200 people signed up in the first 24 hours. So making sure people understand that, there's different ways to communicate with people. You need to hit them all. You can't skip one of them. It's going to be in the paper, it's going to be on Twitter, it's going to be on Facebook, it's going to be in a text. You need to make sure you're not missing that, because now we've got so many ways to get information, but we need to make sure we're hitting them all as well. So create a structure that supports them.
One thing I just add is, I'll start with an anecdote. The day after Irene, or I guess the afternoon, I lived in Newfane Village at the time, I walked into the sheriff's department and said, "So are you guys going to be doing a situation status report for Windham County?" They said, "No, we don't serve the whole county, just the towns that subscribe to us, and we don't really have visibility into that." So then I called the state police barracks and said, "Hey, are you guys going to be doing a situational awareness update for the county?" And they said, "No, we don't do that." And so I'm the director of regional planning commission. And I'm like, well, shit. Somebody should be doing something. And this is part of the reason why we don't have county government, so you don't have like a county level emergency management director like you do elsewhere in the country that's providing this information across municipalities. So that's why your emergency management directors, select boards, and other people, it's really important to get those reports from the State Emergency Operations Center, because we don't have anything formally structured between the municipalities and the state. Is there something we can do about that? I don't know, it's not going to happen right now, but one of the challenges, what this also underscores how important it is for the towns to recognize that you are in charge of your recovery and your response and your rumor control, and trying to avoid that information vacuum that can just create all kinds of additional trauma and other things. Maybe there's something in the interim and in between that we can create to better facilitate that, but right now it really does fall to you guys. And one of the brief response to this, I love our towns. They're like family to me, and sometimes like other family members, including myself, you see bad decisions get made. And if you recover from this, please don't make penny wise, pound foolish decisions. don't start from this. You need to do what you need to do for your town to recover. Don't start from where am I going to get reimbursed for this. Identify your needs first, pursue those needs, and then see if there's going to be state or federal funding to support it. But I've seen some really unfortunate decisions get made where the mantra is, this can't increase taxes. Got news for you, your taxes are probably going to increase after this, but it needs to go towards wise spending to help you with your long-term recovery, to meet your recovery needs. You know, this is not an ideological debate. This is I think you need to get your town back on this footing, because you're the only ones who can do that. No one else is going to do it for you. So just, if you're on select boards or other things, please make wise decisions, and as members of the community, support your select boards. It's really hard for them to make these kinds of decisions. This is not stuff that they necessarily sign up for. They're really good at developing budgets and doing roads and dump trucks and that kind of thing. But when it comes to these really big decisions, like do you abandon that bridge or do you replace it? And then there are going to be other like town plan decisions and zoning. Support your select board members that can't do this by themselves, because otherwise they're only going to hear from a small segment of the population.
So what I'm hearing, Chris, is flood resilience coming soon to a candidate forum near you. Bill, you got a question?
Just a simple question. I'm wondering how FEMA or bigger organizations can help us where we have bridges fail. Specifically, I know 2 rail trail bridges that were old from the 40s. They're near my property, and they became dams and the dams broke and caused a lot of damage. So I'm concerned that if there are ways to improve those by taking them out and new bridges going in.
So, with the rail trail, the example you used there, the state is including the rail trail in its application to FEMA. There have been instances in the past where they have paid for work with FEMA. We're still talking it through with them on that. But I think, you know, we have this problem with borders, right? And because FEMA works on a county basis, like Addison County isn't going to receive the same federal support that other counties do. Private bridge owners also don't receive the same type of support that municipalities or states do. So I think if it's a municipal bridge, there's a path for support there. If it's a state bridge, obviously we have federal highways. And if it's a private bridge, I think we have some problem solving to do. But that is a problem we have to acknowledge and tackle, not pretend it doesn't exist. So the rail trail, most of that land, it's either state or federal. There are parts of it that are actually federal land. Well, I was talking Lamoille, sorry. Hardwick, yeah. So, I guess it's a mix of land, so it depends on where the damage was and who owned that particular structure. But I think we are going to look at the whole thing and make sure that we address the problems. I know that the rail trail project in Lamoille, at least, you know, we've made some progress there. Some of those fixes are going to be much more complicated.
I have phoned a friend with a congressional staffer, which you never say no to.
Hey everybody, Katie Van Hayes, Bernie Sanders State Director. To your question specifically, but maybe broadly as fast as I can, we know that the federal response is not going to be as fast or as robust as anybody wants or needs, right? But the one thing I want everyone in this room to walk away knowing is that your entire congressional delegation is working extremely closely together with each other, with the state, with the president on down and the federal administration to at the very, very least, make it explicitly clear to our colleagues and to everyone in the federal administration what needs to change in federal law that unlocks some of these problems that we're identifying. Because your issues that you're talking about the rail trail, about private bridges, about all of these pieces, these rules didn't come down from God, right? the water came from the sky, but the rules are decided by members of Congress. And so what we are going to be doing over the next number of months, as we did in Irene, sadly I've been in the delegation long enough that I was here for that too, is to take these experiences and these stories so that we recognize where the federal government is not able to step in because of the way the laws are written, and at least tell our colleagues why they need to change. Now, our colleagues may or may not listen to us, but your stories are what's going to help us make that case. And so when you're running into those roadblocks, those bureaucracies, those red tapes, I mean, I think probably whether you like Bernie Sanders politics or not, you recognize he does not love bureaucracy. So we're not here to defend the federal bureaucracy. We are here to change it as best we can. And so we want to hear from you when you're bumping into that brick wall of like, why is this? Why is the private road on my property not covered, but the state road is? Or maybe the state road can't get federal highway money, but it can get FEMA money. Like, we want to know about all these pieces so we can at least make the case to change them. But I do want to make it clear that we know this recovery is not going to be fast enough or robust enough as what it deserves to be. But I will say that we are doing everything within the 3 votes we have in Washington and a really good partnership with our state and our municipalities to make as big of a difference as our great little state can.
Thank you so much. Michelle has promised me this is quick.
So Michelle McCormick, Marshfield, and I would have a lot to say, but specific to the bridges, since, you know, people remembered at the state level that Marshfield existed, I've been telling people that there was absolutely no reason why the state couldn't have requested from FEMA to deploy the Corps of Engineers to specifically address bridges. We still have 3 municipal bridges out, people who are trapped behind them.
Thank you. I'm going to give the panelists 30 seconds to wrap up. We are just about noon, and we are one of the 2 lunch locations, so I know folks will be trickling in. You all are here, so I would encourage you to just stay for lunch, but as an FYI, if you want to do a walk, you can go down to the cafeteria's end. We're going to start at the Chris side, work our way back, 30 seconds each. Final closing thought to leave everyone with. Also, can we just get around for our panelists? Thank you all. Thank you for coming. Last thoughts.
So my little Irene lessons learned, I'll get that to you guys if people want to see it and get it. Remember, do unto those downstream as you do unto those downstream as you have those upstream, do unto you. Don't forget that. Real quick on the public assistance side of things, there have been these things called applicant briefings. I'm sure if you go to the Vermont Emergency Management site or something, there's a recording of these. Nonprofits can also benefit through the PICTA program too. So when you're asking about the rail trail, in our region, they're all non-profit managed, but they could potentially apply through the FEMA PA program for assistance. So that's the reason. So if you're part of a nonprofit or some other nonprofit infrastructure that's critical to your community, get into that loop. If you're having a question about how to access it, reach out to the regional planning commissions.
I would say that from my time in the military, no battle plan survives the first bullet. The most important thing is to move forward, to tackle the challenges in front of you, both short-term and long-term, and to learn from your mistakes, right? Be honest and transparent about those mistakes. So I think we'll work together as a state to move forward, try to make the best long-term recovery, and I would just echo what Chris said about there are going to be some conversations between one town that impact another town, and we all have to work together, even if we're 10 miles down the river from each other. I would just say the situation in Marshfield doesn't resonate for me because that's actually where I grew up. So I don't think I never personally forgot about Marshfield, and we all make mistakes. We should be honest about it and try to do better. So thank you.
I would say emergency management planning should be at the top of that list. I would also say that, relying on your community. I mean, again, the local response is going to be your best response. If you have a downtown, I strongly recommend looking at a designated downtown or village designation. Shout out to Gary Holloway. We were able to access a lot of funding for the, and also you want to talk about solving housing issues as well, provide some streamlining for Act 250 for housing. So if you have an opportunity, check out those programs. But again, it's about communication information. That's where the power lies.
Housing and transportation and housing, the funding systems for those from the federal government make it hard to fix housing and transportation. I'm turning 50 next month. What I would like for my birthday are the following two things. One, we have units. I would like to see money going towards our community members with short-term rentals so they can turn them into long-term rentals in ways that allow them to sustain their lives. That's the first birthday present I want. The second birthday present I want is federal money to unlock to build microtransit that goes down every single road in the state of Vermont. Thank you. That's what I want for my birthday.
And with that, one more thanks to our panelists. Thank you to all of you for being here.